Alright, we're doing Unit 1 review. I'm Daniel Andrini. Let's do this. I need to be fast. So, developments in East Asia during our time period. So basically, Song Dynasty was in power. They were having a continuation of a golden age after the Tang Dynasty, basically. These guys made huge advancements. They made gunpowder. They had better rice from Vietnam, which is drought resistance, and it could be harvested 3 times a year. It's called champa rice. Really important, because they had so much food, they could have a larger population as well. But another thing they invented, which is also important, is paper, which eventually, in the next coming centuries, will transfer to the West through the Silk Road. This, first of all, increased literacy in China, but eventually it'll become a source of literacy for all over Afro-Eurasia, and eventually the Americas with colonization. But anyway, Song Dynasty expanded the Great Canal system, which connected trade and spread culture. So what this was good for is it helped spread these Confucian ideas and Neo-Confucian ideas all across China, and kind of making this homogeneous culture within the country. Also, this trade also allowed technology to grow a little better, because, yeah. Anyway, speaking of this cultural change and development, Confucianism was revamped and reintroduced into China with some Buddhist principles. It helped society be stable, as it demonstrated how a society should be organized. That's all it did, about, like, very family-centric, family-focused. It also used the mandate of heaven, which gave the emperor civil support. A really big, important part of the Chinese government was the imperial bureaucracy. And it helped centralize the power of the government. It used the civil service exam to hire these bureaucrats. And this is important because not only were the nobles in power, but the well-educated commoners were in power. And instead of status, it was based on education. Yes. So this Tang Song Golden Age lasted until 1279, when the Mongols did invade. But you need to remember that the Mongols, they used a tribute system. So obviously none of this progress was lost. China was still booming. They were still having a pretty good time. The land was still very rich. Here we are in Dar al-Islam, the world of Islam. This is kind of the ending chapter of the Abbasid Caliphate. They're kind of in a dark age. They're being fractured by invaders and rebelling states. So the Mongols were coming, taking over stuff. They were no longer in this prosperous age of the House of Baghdad. Baghdad House of Wisdom. You guys know what I'm talking about. They were not the most advanced anymore. Anyway, some of the countries to spring out of the Abbasid Caliphate were, first of all, the Delhi Sultanate in North India. They're Turkic Muslims, and they occupied North India, and they tried to go south, and they did for a little bit. But this Hindu reconquest of the south made this Vijayanagara Empire. I'll talk about that later. But in Egypt, we have the Mamluk Sultanate. Mamluk means slave soldier. They rebelled in 1250 and created their own sultanate. Basically, the Mamluk, it was like a slave revolt, and they made their own empire. Very cool, very big and powerful at the time. And like Confucianism, Islam was vital in uniting these ethnic groups, like across the world, basically, from Spain to India. Like Confucianism, it also united them using Arabic language, and having a similar belief system. Obviously, this created not necessarily a common culture, but a lot of similarities and a way for stuff to spread from India to Spain and back again. So here we are. This is the Vijayanagara Empire, South India. So, as the Muslims in North India tried to invade the south, Hindu kingdoms united, and they made this empire in South India. They were very important for trading in Southeast India. So they received goods from Arabia, right? And these Muslim traders. And eventually these goods would go to Indonesia. And that's how Indonesia became Muslim, by the way. But I'll talk about these Muslim missionaries later. A big important part of this empire, though, was the common acceptance of Hinduism and Buddhism. and the fact that they used the caste system, which is very much so like feudalism, and the way that this society is organized into a pyramid structure, social class, basically. Sometime in the 13th century, though, yes, Islam spread to Indonesia and Malaysia through this, and these converted rulers in the archipelagos propagated the spread of Islam, all over the place. So here's Europe. Europe has fully embraced feudalism. They're less centralized, which with swaths of land are owned by lords, who are on the top of this feudal system. Later, though, the monarchs will soon uniting many of these places and making them larger kingdoms. Catholicism played a major role in feudalism and in Europe. The individual states were weak, but the church helped organize society in a way that wasn't necessarily just statehood. For example, the Holy Roman Empire is just a bunch of small, weak principalities, but they united into this sort of larger federation almost under Catholicism. France, not necessarily the same, but they were actually a very large and powerful entity at the time. So yes, Europe was lagging severely behind China and the Islamic world in terms of technology, wealth, and social progress. Most people were illiterate. All the knowledge was in the monasteries. People couldn't read the Bible. And, don't forget, Mr. Nichols told us about the poop huts and the poop mortar. Very gross. Anyway, state building in Africa in this time period. So it's kind of roles are reversed today, Africa at this time was very wealthy. They had a centralized government, and Europe was sort of lagging behind, Anyway, Mali emerged as this great power in West Africa. They preceded the Ghana Empire, and they grew much larger because they kind of re-centralized the government under Mansa Musa. Mansa Musa, the wealthiest guy in the world, he gave the kingdom a lot of wealth, right? And he converted to Islam through his travels to Arabia through the trans-Saharan trade line. But before Mali, most African kingdoms were chiefdoms with only local authorities. For example, in the Red Circle was the Hausa Kingdom, which is a very loose village-based federation. They also became Muslim through trans-Saharan trade, and most of these cultures had oral-based storytelling. So, they obviously, there's no actual map of them because they were very, very, very decentralized. So here we are in the Americas, real quick. We'll start with North America. We have the Mississippi Mound Builders. These guys made mounds for the rich, and so they could live in them, and they also had them for religious purposes, kind of like pyramids almost, right? They had also a very rigid class system. Surprisingly, though, this whole culture sort of dissipated in 1450, and all these settlements were abandoned. No one knows why, still to this day. So we move down to Central America. Our friends, the Aztecs, they had a very large empire, all based in the beautiful city of Tenochtitlan. They had been very impressive even to the Europeans who were to come in the 15th century. They controlled subjects through this tribute system, very similar to the Mongols in China. And this is a remote rule, so that means they could have large swaths of land with sort of local leaders, basically, owning the land. And then we have the Inca Empire in South America. They're in the Peru and Andes region. They used the Midas system, which had citizens have mandatory civil service. This helped make a large empire, and they used this very direct rule. Oh, we're almost, okay, here we are, boys. Some important comparisons. Very important. So, first of all, the East and West. China, up to this point, had huge amounts of wealth and resource, and they were the top of the world. Does that, they had the best technology, a lot of food, and they had really thriving culture. They also had mass literacy. The Abbasid Caliphate was no longer in the golden age. The Middle East is going to have a lot of problems from now on, for a while, at least until the Ottomans or something come back. Many states revolted from Spain to India. No longer the pinnacle. Southeast Asia became very wealthy, just like China, through trade. The spread of Islam also helped unify many of these states, like Indonesia. Indonesia, for the first time, became a large country. They were just very separated before. Yes, they were the envy of many to be soon, and they'll be a really prime place to colonize later. Europe, still bottom of the barrel. Small principalities and tribes lag behind the East, like severely. Africa, they had a lot of wealth at this point. The Mali Empire, and was another focal point of the world. And the Americas were doing their own thing. They were doing fine up until the 1500s when the Europeans arrive. They obviously have to mess everything up near the end. Last slide. Major religions: Christianity, Islam, and Buddhism. These guys spread rapidly, and that is because they're called conversionist religions. Conversionist religions, because they used missionaries, the use of missionaries. Huge portions of the world today are now a part of these religions. Muslims in India, they did not convert by means of conquest, because that's not allowed in Islam. But for example, in the Delhi Sultanate, they had this thing called the jizya, which is a non-Muslim tax. And so that's why 10 to maybe 25% of the population in India at the time became Muslim. These conversions also occurred through trade. Of course, we know about this. Islam in Indonesia and Africa, and Christianity spread through the Silk Road, through the Middle East, and into China a little bit. The Christianity is not going to have such an impact in China for a while, though. The ruler of all three religions, and Hinduism, including Hinduism this time, used religion to consolidate their power. For example, the Hindu caste system, the Muslim tax, and the Catholic uniting of the Holy Roman Empire underneath the Pope, I guess. Anyway, yes, that's Unit 1 in a nutshell. Thank you. Thank you. You're not that welcome though. Thank you.